Hello, I'm Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats. And with me today for episode 46 of this series is one of my dearest friends in the world, Peter Jukes, who is, look him up. Peter has made an impact on the world, that is worth noting, in journalism and media, currently the founder and editor of British media empire now. Is it an empire yet? But Byline Times. And I don't know, Peter, if I ever mentioned this to you, I was flying back from London once a couple years ago, and just randomly talking to my seatmate and an off-duty pilot, and she said, "Really, the only person I listen to now is Peter Jukes." Right. So
well, this is the woman I pay. I have a staff on British Airways. I pay a couple of 100,000 a year for them to say that. How amazing! Anyway,
well, which is a fun segue, right? Because you and I met during 2008. The presidential campaigns, really sort of the beginning of the social media, influence campaigns, sort of information space that we're in right now. And you were a great piece in Newsweek, I think, at the end of the Democratic primaries, on the dynamics of that. And I think that's, speaks a great deal. I think people today, reading that piece would recognize a lot of things, we've all become familiar with.
It's called Flaming for Obama, I think. And I think it went in Newsweek, but it's also on Prospect. Yeah, and it was everything we see now. Sock puppets, fake accounts, fake Hillary supporters saying racist thing, fake Obama supporters saying misogynist thing, Operation Chaos. And that was, and now that's global. People getting angry, do you remember the classic cartoon we used to use, which was somebody typing their keyboard to bits. They go, what's the matter today? Somebody somewhere is wrong on the internet. And the greater internet dickwad theory, am I allowed to use that word, dickwad, on your, I never know what it means, actually.
In English, that's a pleasant word. So yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's was that, have anonymity plus internet equals dickwad. And we saw that, didn't we? We just were, and I think, I learned a lot there. I actually began with Daily Cost a few years earlier for me, but then we came out of that, didn't we? And MyDD, another very pernicious blogging site, which was pro-Hillary and kind of but quite racist at times. And that dragged me back into politics. I hadn't been involved in politics or journalism properly for 20, 30 years at that point. And then it all came over here. And it was writing that and a piece about monopoly at the BBC, about how our dramas falling behind American drama. I was a dramatist for them for a couple of decades, which was the longest career suicide note in history, but was the beginning of telling the truth. And I've never looked back, and it's been a ball ever since.
Right. Well, I remember I was in London for something, and you took me to some basement wine bar. How classic is that? You gotta know Peter, folks, right? If you want the London adventure with the whole, what Americans would think, he's your guy. But in that, I forget exactly where it was, but there was a conversation about this disinformation and so forth. And I'm the cybersecurity person. I just happened to be there, and you asked me to say a few things in that. And now we're here. Your involvement with uncovering Cambridge Analytica and all those pieces, right? And so why are we talking about this in a cybersecurity, supply chain security, podcast? As I was saying in the green room, we spent a lot of time talking about transparency. I believe a great deal in the business value of transparency, honesty, freedom of speech. Say what you're going to do what you're saying. And I think these same mechanisms apply to all information spaces. I think we live in an information soup in the public environment right now that's unsustainable. That we have to get better at finding the truth, the art of the truth, right?
Yeah. And you're right, call it art. I don't think any machine could crunch that per se, because, if you think how we've evolved, look at gorillas and chimpanzees, they spend most of the day looking at each other. And what they're going is, can I trust this other chimp or gorilla? Are they telling the truth? Are they going to deceive me? And our whole social being, which is one of our great adaptive strengths, collectivity, language, tool making, passing on skills, relies on trusting the information, the very good point, where it comes from. I always love internet analogies. Remember, I think it's postals there. We used to use that when we say, how do you mitigate online chaos and people flaring up, shouting at each other, threatening to dox them, people in these conversations. And one of the, I think it's Postel, the guy who came up with the IPP protocol for communication, was that you have to be very conservative how you write and very liberal in how you listen. And I always look for it. There's that great book, I've got it here, Jonathan, on the information, the guy who wrote about chaos and things like that. But there is something profound in information theory and audit trails and trustworthiness, which I think it's not just, it's human evolution. If we didn't know where the wildebeest were going, we didn't know this berry was poisonous, let alone if we didn't know the mechanics of steam engines or dental work. I mean, imagine, just like somebody does about COVID. I've seen something on YouTube. I'm an expert about COVID now. Don't take the vaccine, right? Imagine talking to my dentist. I've just looked on the internet how I'm going to use this anesthetic. And I saw this program about how to drill in your tooth. The whole of our world is built on truth, facts, and from falsifiability theory, scientific premises. Who said that? What? When? Can we test it to prove they're wrong? And somehow we've evolved these amazing machines, these amazing forms of communications out of that very technology, which is denying the basis on which it's built. Right. So I think there's a profound sort of human moment happening here. Yeah. And just on the truth thing, that's what I realized in 2009 when I wrote this longest career suicide note in history. I basically named names, stitch-ups in the television drama market. And my former amicably divorced ex-wife, senior BBC executive, so you mustn't like that. Then I showed her the piece, completely factual, American TV, UK TV, storylines, a number of storylines, none of commissioned, said you must publish. And I don't know if it make a difference in the industry. All the people who hate me like me now because I like the stories I tell about Russian interference. All those chief executives follow me on Twitter, say, this is amazing, Peter. But it was at some cost, but ultimately not a cost. I was in a world of fiction. I like fiction because it tells inner truths. Sometimes I'm always heavily fact-based. I used to research things, go with undercover police, up in helicopters, all that stuff. And I was looking for truth. And sometimes it's easier in fiction because, there's some of these stories so dark and libelous, you can never tell it, you can fictionalize it. But I realized the people I'm working for just wanted comforting myths. And they'd always change a sharp line, or that's too sharp, it's too disturbing, or, give them a happy ending. There's a great television series. If you haven't seen it and your listeners haven't seen it, I just read Chernobyl, right? And it's about what happened in the Soviet Union around this HBO series, around the lies around Chernobyl. And there's a great speech by the chief scientist who tells the truth. Goes, you can't avoid reality. And we ask, what is the cost of truth? And actually, we should ask the cost of lies, because, no spoilers here, the thing that went wrong with Chernobyl was basically the emergency breakdown system, which meant they did these crazy experiments because they thought they could shut it down. The Bohr rods would come and shut down the reactor. There was a flaw. And actually turned the shutdown into a bomb. The Bohr rods, they had a tip of granite. They create this huge chemical, and then bigger than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined nuclear explosion. And the cost of lies is built into human evolution. I'd say Vladimir Putin is showing the cost of lies, told by lying oligarchs have better military than he did. They're siphoning off all their money to their private Thatchers or their yachts. He's told the Ukrainians, they really like the president. They're all going to rebel and come to your side. And what do we have? It's pernicious, it's awful, there's devastation. But the second biggest army in the world has come to a grinding halt, and all its weapons are being sort of destroyed. And it's probably, going to be pushed back by a country 1/20th of its size. That is the cost of lies.
Well, and on that, let's get our questions out there. So looking back, right? In this series, we've been having these conversations, right? And again, I believe, we as a company believe, right? There's a business advantage, as we're saying, there's evolutionary advantage. Truth and trust and so forth are things. For the Terry Pratchett fans out there, I make a lot of Terry Pratchett references, and this, can't be any better for this one. The Truth is a great novel, basically on, the essence of journalism. How do we, right? And it's not a perfect thing. Cybersecurity is not a perfect thing. Life is not a perfect thing. However, we can do things better or worse, right? So looking back, Anthony, if you could roll the first one, how well was the truth known, right? You and I have had a lot of experience in life now. Looking back at your beginning in theater and communications, journalism, we're really doing the same thing, throughout your career. You're communicating, through words and art. Was it easier? Was it better? And what's that path been like?
It's a very brilliant question. Of course, a very easy question, not touching huge issues of epistemology and human history. But you've actually made me think about it in a new way. So I was a bit different in drama in the 80s when I started. I was surrounded by, in the college I went to in Cambridge University, there were the people like Tilda Swinton and Stephen Fry and Joanna Scannon's just won all these great actors. So I just hung out, they were fun. I wanted to write for them. But even then, what was beginning to happen, and it's this whole phenomenon was big at Cambridge at that time, post-structuralism, right? Post-modernity and post-truth. So I would often get in arguments with people, and they basically says it doesn't matter, it's all a game. I saw, and I was sort of, because they were cool, they'd say things they'd mean, they'd put on these plays, very catchy, but they didn't feel anything. They were very stylish, and I always felt very at odds with that. And then gravitated towards feature writing these days, a book on cities. My first book was about cities, so I need something granular, materialistic, I'm not a Marxist, but I like the idea of historical materialism. And always I was people telling me in my ear, whispering like the devil, there's no such thing as truth. Or Pontius Pilate says to Jesus, doesn't he? When he's about to hand him over to the Pharisees and get him crucified, what is truth? And that was a phenomenon. And it became ramped up, I think, particularly in the 90s. I got very involved, didn't go there, I had young kids, but I did eventually, but not during the war. But I had friends out there in Bosnia. And you had people saying, oh, there's no real message. Oh, it's all Western propaganda, this whole sense that everything, and good journalists I know said, well, nobody's completely objective. Nobody's neutral. Right. So there's a really important distinction here. Obviously, it's not easy to get to absolute zero, right? I'm not sure your fridge goes to absolute zero, but it's probably a bit cooler than the outside. You're probably better off putting your beer in there, right? Right. Likewise, so yeah, it's not completely cold, no, but it's cooler. It's better, right. Likewise with, you can't get to absolute truth. No, I can't get to the pole star. It's there's 1 million light years, so light year, 4 light years away, Polaris, right? But I know it's basically where north is. I can still navigate, use it to navigate. And in journalism, I think this was happened with Trump, I think it's happened with Brexit. Journalists have fallen for this relativism. I met senior journalists, I won't name her, but she's a very, very senior journalist I knew well. The phone hacking scandal, she's a strong Scottish accent, so everybody will know who I'm talking about. Slightly drunk with her one night after some awards ceremony, and she goes, "Why do you curse?" And I go, "Do I curse a lot? I don't. I swear a lot. I didn't realize I was talking about phone hacking. I didn't really swear." So, why do you care? Why do you care? And this surfeit of information, the professionalization of news. People, I know seniors get very, very cynical about there being any kind of truth, but you cannot be neutral. It's not the same. So they get neutral. They're all as bad as each other. Objectivity is not the same as neutrality, because actually as a journalist, just like you as a business, you've got to go for your customers. Can I audit trail this? Is this reliable data? Can I say where it's come from, the supply chain of this stuff, right? That's part of your product. As a journalist, you have to attest to your sources. You have to believe they are true. That is what the customer wants. And so the customer, you're saying, we see businesses are much more enlightened than governments, at least the Trump government and the Brexit government, because they know the values and more practical. And they know the values are there. They don't want stuff that destroys the world. They don't want slave labor. They want to get good product. And when you're talking about truth, I think you inevitably stop being neutral, because you can't be neutral about did the Holocaust happen or not, major issues of human rights. You can't be neutral about somebody's giving you $1 million and it turns out they only give you one. You're not neutral about that. But the idea of transparency, truth, does lead to some democratic principles, I think. Human rights, it leads to democracy, rule of law, accountability. So things we used to call liberal democracy, which the left and the right believe is now a conspiracy. So, I think what's happened to me is this journey from this postmodern world, post-truth world, nothing matters, anything's possible, to the powerful love cynicism, the love nobody knowing anything, to this world where actually, the ninth is, I'm not a Christian, but that's my background. What's the ninth commandment? What's the ninth commandment? Trump never mentions this. What's the ninth commandment? Do not bear false witness. Truth, finally, I just say on this because I'm in a highly litigious zone. I get the academics, there's no such thing as truth. I said, try arguing that in a court of law during a defamation case.
Well, and there's, that I'm glad to hear that, right? Because I am usually, the Pollyanna. You're like, look, the world was never perfect. And there's parts of it that I recall personally that I think have gotten better, right? And what you said, I think you and I at our ages were sort of born into a cynical post-truth world. And I grew up believing a lot of things I don't believe now, right? Because it's what everybody was saying. And it turned out just to be
multiple CIA, AIDS was created by the CIA. We believe that stuff, didn't
reptile aliens, whatever, right? We're all, and I see both in the kind of, where I met you, actually, in marketing, in security, in business, talking in the public, trying to move the world forward so we can have more secure infrastructure or other things I care about. These are the same things, right? And you put it well, right? It's interesting. A lot of the guests we have, a lot of my friends who are on the technical side, are much more cynical, right? But the reality is that businesses don't like risk. I don't like risks. I would like to know that the people I'm getting things from and selling to somebody else are not going to cause me problems. Using slave labor, lying, whatever, right? I just, and what we have now is fascinating. The software bill of materials space, right? Any number of shout outs, like naming folks on this, because everybody deserves a credit. But, Christine Porath on LinkedIn today, I shared her TED talk that a friend had shared from Georgetown University, has done studies on civility in business and found real nice empirical numbers, huge numbers, 25% and 40% in productivity and employee retention and so forth by being decent to each other. Right. And that doesn't mean you're not going to have office politics. It doesn't mean everything can be perfect. But if you put an effort in, you can keep your beer cold. People will stay with colder beer and they will, I love that analogy. I've been working on everything now. So, Anthony, the second one. So here we are right now. And both in the parallel lives you and I have lived, in the shared spaces we've been down, you can see, in the public information space, as you say, it's a bit of a mess now. I don't know if it's gotten better or worse, but I think it's driving towards a better future. I think I can see shapes right now where either, I don't know, I mean, I'm too many leading questions in there. But what do you think? Where are we now?
I know. Yeah. So first, are we can we see through the glass? We're looking through a glass darkly. That is now then face to face. It's from, I'm just show off my English literature background, 14th Corinthians. And it's from the King James Version. And so there's something brilliant that literature can do looking through a glass darkly. It actually means through a darkened glass, but that's the construction. But literature, obscure, complicated things can be physicalized, embodied like a nice steak, you know what I mean? There's a role for opaqueness, for evocation, for embodiment. There's another part of the story to maybe get to later is that, how do we tell these stories bigger? How do we make these narrative brands clearer? But to the main question, are things worse? And are things getting more confused? And I look at it this way, like cities, right? So my first book, as I said, was on cities. It's an amazing invention. London was the first city you couldn't see the end of. It was there were other bigger cities, but it was so big you couldn't see from a high building the end of it. And what you had was this accumulation of strangers. People lived in towns and villages. And suddenly, especially in urbanized Great Britain, like 50% of the world already, is urbanized. They were living with strangers. And it was a disaster. I mean, crime, prostitution, poor health, sewage, sanitation, horse manure. It was just fire. Yeah, with all the fires, and these strangers who hate each other, fighting each other, robbing each other. I would say, everybody flee to the countryside. Dickens, who loved London, worked in the blacking warehouse and lived down the road, used to walk down the road. I think he went down that road past it used to be the Dickens pub, back to his father in debtor's prison. Hated it. But when he moved to the countryside, his last words before he died was, I must go back to London. So there's something about cities, and I think what we're going through is the metropolis of the mind, right? So, the first phase of industrialization of physical processes, now we're industrializing intelligence, not consciousness, I don't think, but intelligence. Marketing, industrialized emotions, pop music, industrialized emotion. Now we're industrializing and replicating it, our intelligence and so on. I don't think intelligence is humanity as well. We must just separate that out, because intelligence and consciousness are completely separate things. So all of us now, and I see the mental health impacts on young people. Yeah, they've got a WhatsApp, they've got a boyfriend, they're saying they've got for their last 10 years, their minds, they can't sleep, they're buzzing they're like in the metropolis of the mind. And it's gone through that phase of complete chaos, like the early days of daily course at my DD, and we tried to create a civilized patch. That time is a bit like the Wild West, where you have the bad town, the bad sheriff, and we try to make a nice town. Then the bad guys came over to the nice town, we go back over to the bad guys' town and try to take it over. It's civilization. It's how we live together. And now we can do it remotely. You can be in a boat surrounded by manatees. I can be in the center of London. So suddenly that citizen, to be a citizen, to be, to have urbanity and a sense of the polis, politics comes to the polis, the town, the city, we can't move away from it. It's on our smartphone, it's on our computers, and we will sort it out. I already think, I watch people, and I'd be, at a higher level than daily cost, because it's Russian agents, out of Russian guys sent to me, Iranian journalists outside my flat, legal threats, doxing, the sort of stuff we went through. I just increased in my last 10 years since taking on the tabloids and Russian interference and oligarchs and legal threats and all that. But actually, it's just daily cost writ large. And I see again and again people go through the same arguments and getting really angry and then creating sock puppets and then telling, I'm going to get you, and just getting furious, and then go, what's the point? What's the point? And so it can't be undone, can it? Because you can't undo this technology. Twitter going down the tube, somebody creates something else. They already are creating something else. We have to learn that we're going to want to communicate with each other, and we're going to want to know what each other's doing and date each other, going for drinks and finding out the best restaurants and arguing the toss with them and thinking these people are awful because they voted one way and the geniuses go the other way, but then they're not. This is politics. I'm reading about Florence, where I just come back from. God, the Medicis. Give me a break. We've got to humanize it. And I think the other thing of it, cities got better when they became public. Had the problems with the railways, the problems with water, gas, electricity. You needed regulation, you needed a sense of common ownership, shared public goods. And what we've got now is like the early days of the world. Well, it's the Standard Oil, all that stuff. You've got some crass billionaire oligarchs wanting to get their message, make money, but even worse, like Murdoch, get their message across, and then screwing up big time with them. That technology, our rights on Twitter on here don't belong to them. We can walk away. And these are ultimately tools for conviviality. One last thought, everybody in power hates it and needs it. So all my journalist friends go, I hate Twitter, it's awful, it's awful. And I go, yeah, it is awful. We built our business on Twitter because I got Rupert Murdoch to reply to me. You know what I mean? They've been in their cocoons, and this element of disruptive technology I agree in, but it's gone too far with people like Bannon and Musk. But there were lazy silos of establishment people who work for the New York Times or work for government who never expect to challenge it, can't cope with an upstart like me going, what are you talking about? That's not true. And that, and that is you're always going to be a good thing, but it always, where's the money and who owns it?
Well, you know, and I mean, I'm having more fun with this than I expected, right? Because there is so much cynicism out there, right? But I see the same thing. I think people like having a good life, a good day, a good business, things that work, right? You know, some stability and so forth. And I see in these same structures, right? You know, in the, you know, to put it in context, right? You know, so Schneider Electric, you know, is the first customer that we as Cybeats can talk about, who's got our software bill of materials management platform, SBOM Studio, and is doing things with it and getting value out of it and doing, doing, in many cases, the same things we need in journalism, right? And in the media or whatever that means, which is just attesting to people that that organization, that entity is doing business with, right? And we have other critical infrastructure companies doing the same thing. It's been fascinating for me the last couple of years, right? Working with governments and major corporations and nonprofits and all sorts. The first episode of this series we did was with Shuli Goodman at the Linus Foundation about attestations about carbon credits, right? These same systems apply. And, where I got into this was the digital bill of materials, right? An attestation ecosystem I dreamt up with the colleague at Unisys. And the word attest, the word attestation. We in our world, in the cyber and business world, are using it a lot more these days, right? What does it mean? It means that you said you would say, now you're saying, or you're attesting that you have the ability to produce, right? In journalism, right? You're not going to reveal your sources, but they're there, they're real, right? And you're attesting to the fact that they are, right? And that means a lot of
value.
That's your value.
Trust you that you check this out, and I'm sure that's the same. Your companies, that these people deliver stuff they've tested out, they've done due diligence,
right? So Anthony, last question, because we got to get into that, but I, as I said in the green room, I like making up these sort of lighthearted comments and so forth. I think about each of my guests, who they are, and what we're going to do as a conversation. And I just can't help this one, right? Because and as I say, this conversation has gone way better than I expected. Not to support this point, I think we're at the dawning of the bloody age of Aquarius.
This
I think
is the
forces are driving us. Right?
Age of Aquarius.
I think it's inevitable.
Aquarius.
Public opinion, what people like to consume, business, regulation are forcing us, to work on the art of the truth and to actually put our money where our mouth is and say, as a business, as a person, as a company, as a country, I will attest to what, to what I said is true. And that leads to, again, either we need authoritarian dictatorial things in business and in life and everything else, or we don't. And if we don't, then the premise of individuals, making choices, the whole French Revolution to today, right, needs the ability to trust each other like our ancestors did on the savannas.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is an interesting resonance for me because I started singing rather badly. Some hair, isn't it? Age of Aquarius. And my parents, I remember they had the brochure and everybody's naked in the 60s. Went to see that shit. My brothers are 10 years older than me. And I look back at the 60s. It's very interesting as somebody who's born in 1960. So I was not a 60s kid. I was a baby. I was Generation Jones, older than you. But two things flowed from that, and good and bad. And I think I'm always intrigued by how many of those pop stars and actors became supporters of Brexit, supporters of Trump, supporters of COVID conspiracy theory. And that there was something missing in that 60s Age of Aquarius thing, which you've just spoken to brilliantly, which is an inconvenient and uncool thing, which is society. It's, that you, and my society, I don't mean community. Community is in Germany, I think, called that Gemeinschaft. Everybody knows each other, right? A society, they're strangers. How do you deal with strangers? That's what people learn in the cities. And I think the emphasis on the me generation is part of the problem. I'm not saying there's a lot left with it, but the fact that these are organizations you have to build with individuals. I, like you, believe the individual is the source of value, right? Not the company, not the state, not the party. Whenever you think the party or the vanguard of the state is bigger than the individual, torture and murder happens, right? But individuals are not isolated. Individuals learn, we have huge mirror neurons, we need each other. One way to kill somebody really would drive them mad is solitary confinement. See,
Right.
Tom Hanks talking to a basketball case, talking to a basketball. And somehow that understanding, I think, there was a lecture I saw given by Michael Ignatieff. I think this was all before Brexit trouble kicked off, but not before. Because of what kind of happened with globalization, which is many ways a good thing, especially for developing countries now doing better than Britain, for example. But where was sovereignty? And that's where you kick off with Make America Great Again, or take back control, Brexit, because people have a sense of everything's in free fucks, anything's possible. They crave authority. They crave somebody to tell them that. Meanwhile, and I'd say this is the great problem of free markets. I'm a hero of mine, Adam Smith. He always said the one big problem with free market is monopoly. Tech monopolies, particularly, have siphoned off our data, siphoned us off. The product is free, you are the product, So they make their billions, killing journalism, things like that. The advertising will take it away from newspapers, no local reporters. You don't know what's going to go on your council down the road in Florida because there's no journalist to cover it. Through monopoly dominance. And the whole high tech, the model is big venture capital, take it all over, then jack up the prices. That's extractive value. And then people get treated like products. Then people get their data stripped from them. They're electorally treated like tools to be played in culture wars. And we've got to get sense, not just the individual has value, because the oligarchs say, well, I have great value, I'm genetically superior, I'm going to live forever. Peter Thiel, freeze my body, transfer my consciousness to a machine. We still got to come out, we are collective animals. Doesn't mean that we lose our individuality, but we're nothing without each other. And that's Adam Smith. The value, here's Adam Smith, the founder of modern capitalism, if you like, great Scottish philosopher. There's a whole story of the pin. How many people, the hundreds of people involved in making a simple pin. That's a labor theory, and that's a collective, the supply chain, all those different people. It's an amazing symphony of human activity with a plan, with money, with trust and idealism, and with a vision of a pin. They can make a pin, let alone putting things in space or brain surgery. So we've swung too far, I think, to the idea of the sort of the disruptive billionaire, brilliant individual. And when they get on Twitter, they reveal they're not so brilliant. Somehow we've got to find that the value is in individuals and between us.
Yep. And I think we will. I think we basically have to. This is why, inevitability curves have fascinated me forever, right? To map this all back to the business world and then, the cybersecurity world that, I tend to do for a living most of the time. It's better, faster, cheaper, right? It just is. Truth is a better path. We all have enough challenges already. You've touched on so many of them just individually, sociologically, but at the end of the day, if you're electric utilities are not electric utilities, they're a bunch of individuals. There's somebody down there who's got to do something, and if they can just have a slightly higher reliability in what they're hearing, which is literally what we have no choice but to build into the infrastructure with software supply chain right now for lots of reasons. So I as well, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing as much of whether you and I are right as I get to. But I think the art of the truth is something that's been around with us, and it's the core of who we are, and it's only going to get better.
And if it doesn't, we're, to use a polite term, screwed.
Well, evolution will take care of that. Peter, thank you very much for everything. I'll see you in the post. Anthony and everyone else, have a good day.
Bye.